listeners of ATTMind Radio. I am your host, James Jesso, just packing up my bicycle here. Locked it up so I could head down into this place. Hopefully I don't fall on the way down. It's kind of steep. So, obviously you don't know what I'm talking about if you're not watching this on YouTube. But I grew up here in Kitchener, which is where I'm shooting this little intro video. And I'm around some places that I spent a lot of time when I was just a wee juvenile delinquent, doing things, nothing in particular. But I thought it would be nice to be in this space while I give the intro to this episode, which is episode 37 with Erica Wohldmann. So before we get into the actual episode, before I give her bio and introduce you, I'm going to start off with I guess a couple announcements. So some of you may have, I totally just gapped, like what am I doing here? I have a list so that I wouldn't do this. Yes. As many of you already know, I fund this podcast by way of Patreon, which is a platform by which you, the listener, can come on over and be a supporter of it by paying a little bit of money per episode. I mean, I'm not making it sound super excitable, but the point here is that it's amazingly helpful to me. Even the smallest little donations, $1, $2, $3 per episode, is extremely supportive. And there are a few people who have been giving consistently pretty much the highest amount that can be given, and that is Greg, Carl, and Wes. And I just want to thank you guys explicitly for your help and your support in bringing this podcast to the peoples, and to everyone else who's supporting as well. Thank you again. Even the smallest amount is very valuable. So that's the first announcement. I guess it's more like the announcement is, hey, I'm really excited that these people support. So the second announcement is that a friend of mine, it's getting grimy. The second announcement is that a friend of mine, a colleague out in Australia, has started an actual microdosing research, like research on what are the benefits of microdosing, and they're looking for volunteers, not volunteers to start microdosing on their supply or anything, but to do surveys of their own experiences while they're microdosing over the course of time. I consider this to be extremely valuable research. And I'm really, really interested to see what the outcomes are when those metrics are in. So if you're interested in participating in that research, you can head to my website, jamesdavidjesso.com, find the show notes for this episode, which is episode 37, and I'll have a link there in the show notes for you to check it out. If you're watching on YouTube, it's already in the link description, so just go for it. The second last announcement, is that some of you might know that I write books. I mean, especially if you've been following my work and this podcast, you will know that I write books. But what some of you might not know is that I have a small book that came out between my two full-length ones called Soundscapes and Psychedelics. Now, it's about to get discontinued for several reasons, and so if you'd like to get a copy of that before it is other people. I get really nervous shooting videos around other people, but this is a really great opportunity to show you this. So, the next announcement is that my book, Soundscapes and Psychedelics, which came out between The True Light of Darkness and Decomposing the Shadow, is about to go out of print. I'm going to be discontinuing it. So if you want to get a copy of it before it gets passed off to only overpriced third-party Amazon sellers and ebooks, now's your opportunity to do so. You could check it out on Amazon. Again, everything that you could possibly want from anything that I've said in these episodes is all accessible through jameswjesso.com. So if you want to check out Soundscapes and Psychedelics before the opportunity to do so is gone, please head over to my website and take a look at the book and consider purchasing one. So that is pretty much the end of the announcements. Onwards to the bio for Erica Wohldmann, Dr. Erica Wohldmann. So she has her joint PhD in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. She's currently a professor of psychology at the California State University, where she teaches ecopsychology best practices in sustainability, the psychology of food choices, and other courses as well, or topics as well. She has been published in various peer-reviewed scientific journals, as well as on Psychology Today and the National Wildlife Federation website. I caught up with her by reference or encouragement by a former guest, Stephen Gray, to check out her work about rewilding. She's also going to be a speaker at the upcoming Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver, which I intend to be there, so it'd be great if some of the listeners came and checked it out as well, and I will see you there. We can meet, have tea, whatever. But I was really excited to get a chance to talk with Dr. Wohldmann. She's an incredibly interesting woman with a very cool story to tell. I hope that you enjoy this episode, and see you at the outro. Erica, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. I'm excited to pick your brain about this idea around rewilding. As I mentioned in the intro, which I'm actually going to record after this talk, we were connected by Stephen Gray from the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver, and where you're going to be teaching at the end of October. Yeah, and you and I chatted. You sent me the link to your TED Talk, which was about rewilding. And I've been really interested in rewilding for a couple years now, mostly through the work of Daniel Vitalis.
Sure.
And so it'll be really cool to get your perspective on what this is. So I'm going to ask you now the first question, which is probably the one that you get the most and you answer the most. But answer it now as if it's to an entirely brand new audience that have never heard it before, which is, what is rewilding?
Well, so really, I would say, actually, I haven't had that question. People just seem to think they understand exactly what it is, and as if I know exactly what it is, but I do tell people I'm going to teach them how to do it, so I feel like I should know something about it. I would say that it's learning how to live in greater alignment with our ancient bodies. So we talk about how biology doesn't change as quickly as technology. So we're living in these very old bodies that are not in all ways completely adapted for this modern world that we've created. For example, our bodies want to take in salt and fat and sugar at all possible costs. And that's because those were very hard nutrients to acquire for our ancestors. So they evolved to want to consume them when they were available. Our ancestors didn't really know that vending machines would be something that existed in the modern world. So now every time we take our hand away from a bag of chips or a slice of cake, we're fighting evolution. It makes it really difficult, and you can see the effects of that. And here in the U.S., 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. So I would say rewilding, and to me, is learning how to live in greater alignment with our genetic dispositions.
So in your TED Talk, you give the story of how you, I guess, I don't know if stumbled upon or accidentally discovered, or maybe accidentally on purpose discovered the role of being in nature towards the physiological and psychological health of the human beings. But can you offer the listeners here like a short but beautiful recap of your story and how you came to be someone educating on rewilding?
Well, I teach classes about practices in sustainability, food psychology, cognitive psychology, and I get a lot of questions about what we have to do in order to live a sustainable life, or do we have to go back to living as hunters and gatherers? And to me, that's sort of kind of a straw man, right? Like we can't be sustainable if we continue to live in our modern ways. So really, I wanted to know could we even do that? Have we lost complete touch with ourselves? And then, as I said, I wanted to feel what it was like to live like our ancestors did, with some modern conveniences. So I took a sabbatical from my job and I went to live in the forest. My goal was that I would spend no money on food for 6 months. I didn't really know a whole lot about wild food or edible plants or mushrooms, a little bit, but not very much. And I took some books and I moved right in. The first few days were really tough because I really had no idea what I got myself into. But very quickly, I realized that our eyes, our visual systems, everything I know about them, they evolved to detect targets and food, to see color and moving objects, and all of those skills that I apply to my life in the city were really useful. Mushrooms would just pop right out of a field of dead leaves, decayed leaves, and I could hear sounds and smell things that I really didn't feel like I would ever notice in the city. I say that I lived in a constant state of perpetual joy. That's a mental state that psychologists call flow. It's characterized by joy, and you're just completely absorbed in what you're doing. So, my only job in the forest was to find food. And very rarely in our daily lives do we have just one thing we need to focus on. So it's very difficult to achieve those states of flow. I can't really even think about, I think about my colleagues and their work lives and my students and their lives, and most of them wouldn't characterize their day-to-day experiences with the words spontaneous joy.
Now, you made a comment about us being evolved to pay attention to variances in color and sounds and all of these things, and I couldn't help but think about how that biological tendency has been, I guess, perverted as an extension of those tendencies being capitalized on literally in the form of advertising and subliminal messaging. And that brings me into the consideration about where we're at as a society right now, as a civilization, with an abundance of degenerative diseases, mental health conditions, and issues. You mentioned obesity, which is just one, big piece, but still a small piece of a much larger issue, a much larger problem that we're facing as a species and as an entire world. And I'm curious if you could explain your perspective on where we're at right now as a civilization and what role segregation or separation of our so-called wild environment has played in where we are now.
Yeah, well, that's a really deep question. I guess I'll start by saying, we've been defined in this culture, in this Western culture, as consumers. And so as a consumer, you only have two options. You can consume or you cannot consume. But we have so many more roles than that. We can create whatever kind of world we want to live in. And I think most of us feel very disempowered by the way our capitalist economic system defines us. So that being said, I feel like spending more time in nature, rewilding, if you will, has the power to transform the way we think of ourselves and help us reconnect to the greater web of life. half of the global population lives in cities, right? So 90%, we spend 90% of our lives indoors. And in these urban indoor environments, we've got more pollutants, more toxins. I just read an article yesterday about how chromium-6 has been found in drinking water all across the US, and it's causing cancer and other health issues. But what we know is spending time outside in nature helps restore the mind. It helps reduce mental fatigue from work. It helps improve our life satisfaction. It improves cognition, thinking, learning. It reduces anxiety, provides a sense of calm, gives us opportunities to exercise. And there's so many benefits to having access to green spaces and to taking time to spend in nature that I feel like can help alleviate some of those issues associated with living in the modern world. I don't know if that really answered your question. Your question was kind of a multi-part.
Well, it definitely addressed the question. Now, it seems obvious that we as somewhat ingenious creatures are able to modify and alter our environment and lifestyles, like this whole biohacking movement, to bring in more of a sense of being in nature in our workspaces. Most of us don't really have the opportunity to, spend several months living out in the woods.
Sure.
And so things like, diffusing cedar oil into your office space, having nature sounds playing, having more, posters of color, going to the local park. These things are obviously going to be advantageous, but is there something qualitatively different? And if so, why, in regards to entering more wild environments, as in not a tailored city park, but into the deep wood? And is there? And if so, why? Do you see that as being a difference?
Yeah, I mean, you say those sort of technological nature. Is its terminology here in our eco-psychological world, and you say it's obvious that it has benefits, but as it turns out, it's not so obvious. Technological nature doesn't have the same benefits to cognition, at least, and psychological health that being in actual nature has. There are some benefits, but they're very limited. So posters on your wall or, apps that you download that play nature sounds, they certainly help improve psychological health and cognitive health, but not to the same degree that being in nature really does. Now, does sitting next to a tree in a park equate to being deep in the forest? Well, probably not, but maybe not because of the fact that we're not more deeply embedded in it, but it could just be a function of how much time we actually have, when we're doing those two different activities, right? So if you're sitting in a park next to a tree and not in the forest, it's probably because you have limited time and you're thinking about other things and you've got a lot on your mind and you've got things to do afterwards. And you take the time away to go camping or go for a long hike, you're not constrained by that schedule. When you give yourself the opportunity to be time free, right? Free from a schedule, free from your technological devices, free from constraints, you get an opportunity to really expand your mind in a way that you don't when your life is dictated by a clock. When I lived in the forest, time didn't exist. It was light or dark. In the dark, I was asleep, and in the light, I was up looking for food. And I didn't have a plan for tomorrow except find more food. And I could live like that for 6 months. When you're able to free yourself, whether it's literally or metaphorically, right? You have so many more attentional resources, right, to devote to being creative, and self-actualizing, being the best version of yourself. I would say that it's qualitatively different. Maybe not exactly for, why we think it is. Just sitting next to a tree could provide you with that experience. It just probably won't, because it's difficult to break free from that sort of dominant paradigm of what you should be doing instead when you're in a park as opposed to deep in the forest. But that doesn't mean that you don't get benefits, for sure. Numerous studies have shown benefits. Just even, sitting, just having a view of a window, right? So the classic study is patients in a hospital room, when they could look out at trees and green spaces and the lawn of the courtyard, as opposed to other buildings, healed from, I think it was gallbladder surgery much more quickly. They took fewer pain medications, and their postoperative recovery was a lot faster. So there's certainly benefits, but I would say that those sort of mind-expanding benefits that many people are seeking through various means, whether it's meditation or yoga or dance festivals or psychedelic experiences, those kind of mind-expanding experiences really need more depth.
So I want to deepen into the slightly outside of the dominant paradigm in regards to there's the psychological benefits of being in the forest and all of these things. But in your talk, you made some comments about speaking with plants and that the church is like the forest is your church and plants are the communion, which goes into a discussion about wild foods and stuff that I'll ask you afterwards. I'm just curious if you can maybe tap into your perspective on what's beyond the sort of conventional paradigm of, physiological health and mental well-being. And yes, I'm breathing healthy air and these things. What's deeper than that? And what is that deeper for you, and how do you see it?
Living in the forest helped me recognize my place in the greater web of life. I see taking a plant and placing it on my tongue, whether it's the carrot that I ate for breakfast this morning or a dandelion that I pick when I'm out walking around in the urban wild, or a hand of another human that I touch, as an opportunity to connect with Source. We are all part of this living and breathing ecological network of mutuality. Everything I do affects the greater. So for me, I wouldn't say that it's plant specific. It's a life specific. And when I have an opportunity to commune with life, it gives me the opportunity to commune with what I think of as my version of, capital G-O-D, God, right? The universal oneness, Source, whatever you want to call it. Placing it into my mouth and putting it on my tongue is just one way to sort of recognize that I'm an intimate partnership, that it's literally uniting earth body and my body. And you could do that with, like I said, any intimacy, touching someone's hand or shoulder. Yeah.
I like this idea of bringing the sense of intimacy and communion that many of us would be familiar with when we think about being with another person in a romantic situation.
Sure.
Taking their touch onto our skin, taking parts of their body into our mouths and vice versa, and that being a very intimate experience. And I like bringing that sense into our relationship with the forest, into our relationship with the plants and the life. One of a former guest, Yarrow Willard, he was talking about what I later called microdosing the forest, and about tasting the plants, bringing it just to the tip of your tongue, and it being a way to biologically sort of learn and explore how that plant shows up as an education to help us learn how to better show up in this world. And I've been doing that now ever since that interview, and really taking some time just walking through the park. You know, I'm going from A to B, but I got things to do, but taking time in the middle to be like, okay, I've got 30 seconds to just be with this plant, to say hi and to taste it and to see what it has to offer me, even if it's as simple as like, it tastes like that. No attachments to any, mystical revelations. I mean, usually the harder you look for it, the less likely you are to, the harder you look for what you expect to find, the less likely you're going to find what you expect. So just being with what comes up. And
sure.
Yeah, it's
sort of
beautiful.
like sitting on the bus, right? Like sitting on the bus around a lot of different people. Maybe one of those people you would connect with in a deeper way, and maybe none, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, forcing it doesn't usually work. One experience I had recently in Serbia on Mount Kopaonik, being just there for the entire day to be with our experience, whether as a group or going off on my own. You can't force it was a primary learning for me.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So deepening into this talk about food, you said when you were out in the forest, when you were living out there, that you basically only had one thing that you really needed to focus on, which was finding food. And we're talking about tasting plants, bringing them into our mouths. And I think this is a very important discussion around food and what we eat. And this bit is probably very obvious that what we eat as a civilization has really contributed to a state of illness amongst the grander population, whatever it might be that biologically drives us to eat, fat, sugar, and salt. The things that we're eating oftentimes are nutritionally deficient, and I can't remember who it was that said the quote about we're eating ourselves into death by starvation. And I'm curious if you can comment on where you see the conventional diet, say the standard American diet, and the conventional food shed in regards to monoculture and industrial agriculture, and sort of compare that with what you see as being present within more wild food or more intentionally cultivated foods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, most of us, when you go into the grocery store, unless you're walking around the perimeter, the outside, all of the aisles, right? So everything in the aisles are essentially what I call food-like products. They are sold to you as food. They look like food. They taste like food. They're what we know as food. We're told it's food, but it doesn't really resemble anything that I would, or our grandparents even, would consider food. The plants are so far removed from the actual ingredients are so far removed from the original plant from which they came that they're hardly recognizable, not even pronounceable. So but I live in Southern California, where we have really great small urban ag movement. And I see that happening all over the country. Every time I go back home to St. Louis, urban agriculture is becoming increasingly popular. Detroit with Will Allen, and there's people making change all over the country. I think when we care for our food, it goes beyond this idea that food will then care for us. As we're intentionally cultivating food, we're taking care of the soil, right? We're making sure that the fungus and the microbes and the little worms in our soil are fed rather than poisoned with biocides. So it's healthier for us. It's not covered in poison. It's not poisoning our drinking water. It's not poisoning our fish and going into our system and poisoning our breast milk as we decide to move into those spaces. So the intentionality behind cultivating food is present, especially in small, mindful farming practices. The difference between wild food and cultivated food, I don't really know. I've read some studies that show that some of the wild foods are more nutritionally rich than their cultivated counterparts. But, it's hard to know whether or not that's because the soil has not been manipulated and that the compost is just naturally, nature composts itself, right? As plants die and fall to the ground and rot in the seasons, it's constantly feeding the soil. So it's hard to know whether the food that we find in the wild is nutritionally more dense because the nature is caring for the soil and we are not, or if there really is something to the wildness. That I would say, it's hard to know, but in any event, I would, very clearly say it's important that we're eating food that has not that's been grown by people who are stewards of the land and really care for the land. And traditionally, that has been our farmers. Really, it's only been in the last 50 years that hasn't been the case. I see us moving back to that place. I see us having to move back to that place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that the soil integrity is not going to hold to this mass monocropping of basically singular plants to pack all the boxed kibbles and human kibbles and bits for the mass dying population. It's really not. It's not going to hold that much longer.
It won't work, and at the same time, we're killing our pollinators, right? So we can't keep doing that. It's just not going to work for us. We talk about needing to feed the growing population. Look what happened in South Carolina when they sprayed for Zika. All those bees died. So maybe we're going to have all these wonderful, healthy babies now, but who's going to feed them?
I didn't know about this. You said South Carolina?
Millions of bees died in just hours. Within 2.5 hours, millions of bees were dead after we sprayed for Zika. And so it's this, of course we need healthy babies, of course. But if we kill our pollinators, how are they going to get food?
Maybe you could expand on this a little bit for people who are just tuning into this idea of healthy pollinators and the death of bees, which also goes into, like we were just talking about, monoculture, the spraying of chemicals. What's the current situation? Because I know a lot of people know, some people kind of know, but they don't know that, we'll just say, focusing on bees specifically as a reference point, but that our farming practices are jeopardizing our capacity to not only grow plants, but for plants to even grow at all by killing off the pollinators. Can you talk about that situation a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I talk about in my classes, it's pretty obvious that there are some things that we're doing that kill pollinators, like, for example, spray biocides on them, right? So if you spray life-killing poison on a bee, even if it doesn't kill it, it's probably going to weaken its immune system and make it more susceptible to mites and other parasites. Which we know is happening with our pollinators, our bees. But also, I'm we're growing these monocrops that don't give them the nourishment that they need. So, I mean, I could feed you, let's say you need 2,000 calories a day to maintain your current body weight, which is probably not true, but that's the number our government likes to give us. I could feed you 20 oranges a day, right? So you're going to get your 2,000 calories. And I could feed you 20 oranges a day, and today you're going to be fine. You're not going to be hungry. You're going to be fine. Tomorrow you're going to be fine. The next day you're going to be fine. Maybe even 6 months from now you'll be okay. But over the course of your life, pretty quickly, you're going to start seeing some health deficits, right? Because oranges don't, as delicious as they are, contain all the nutrients that we need to support life in our bodies, our functions. That's what's happening when we grow monocrops to bees. So when we grow acres and acres of corn or acres and acres of one crop, our bees don't get the nutrient-rich diets that they really need to support their little lives. And so it goes beyond, our farming practices and how we're currently raising food in so many different ways is problematic. It depletes the soil when you grow just one crop all the time. It never has an opportunity to replenish itself. It compacts the earth when the soil is depleted because the microbes and fungi, they die in there. Compacts the earth, causes runoff. And there's just, so many problems associated with the way that we currently grow food. But the great thing about a system that's so broken is there's lots of ways to change it, and we know how to do it. I mean, our ancestors have been farming for 10,000 years. We call it the agricultural revolution. They figured it out, and we've in our lifetimes we've had good intentions to feed more people and make farming easier. Right? Farming's really tough. We wanted more time to spend with our families, so I understand how we got to where we are, but I think we just didn't quite understand the consequences. And now that we do, we've got to change. We don't have a choice.
So let's deepen a little bit about soil. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I just interpreted this, but in your TED Talk, you made a comment of one of the things that we could be doing to sort of like, quote, rewild a little bit as modern humans is to get dirty. And to, again, I can't remember exactly how I took my notes here, but can you talk about dirt and the importance of dirt and possibly touching in on the microbiome if you could?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, so I do know that playing in the dirt helps to build stronger, more disease-resistant immune systems, and that's partly because of some of the bacteria that are contained in the dirt. And it's just, our microbiome, our entire immune system that's located in our belly is composed of heaps and heaps of good bacteria. So I would imagine, but I'm not sure, that that's partly because some of those bacteria thrive when we either add the additional bacteria or supplement the additional bacteria with some dirt. It also causes our brains to release serotonin, which is our natural antidepressant, playing in the dirt. So it's really good for us. And a friend of mine who works for NASA said, and I don't know if this is true, but he works for NASA and said it, that our astronauts take dirt capsules with them when they go to the space station to help keep them healthy. Yeah, to eat them, to help keep them healthy. So, my area, I think I eat plenty of dirt. I don't wash the plants that I forage. I probably get plenty of it in me, but I wouldn't encourage you to start loading up gel caps and swallowing it. Especially not the dirt in the city. You never know what's in it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really good for us. And, playing in dirt's kind of a meditation too, right? I mean, it offers us lots of benefits.
Do you, are you familiar with I assume that you are, but the concepts around grounding, like the earthing movement? And if so, could you comment on it a little bit?
I don't know that much about it. So earthing movement is what, like being in dirt?
It's like electromagnetically grounding your body by being in direct connection with the earth.
Huh. Yeah. No, I can't say that I can speak to that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I mean, I can say that I think it feels really good to be barefoot and to put my feet in the dirt. But I don't know if there's any, scientific evidence, or I don't have the experiential evidence of why that feels good. Yeah.
Okay. So moving on. In your, I've heard you talk about a ritualistic giving back to the earth as a show of gratitude for what it offers us in the form of food, medicine, and even for the experience of simply being amongst its beauty. Can you talk about what that is for? Is that just something that we're doing for our own psychology? Is that something that we're doing because the earth receives it? And I guess this kind of opens up a larger discussion about the consciousness of plants and the consciousness of the earth as well. But can you just comment on what this process of giving back means to you and why you feel like it's important?
Well, when I think about reciprocity, giving back, the kinds of acts of reciprocity that I engage in are very nourishing for the soil and the plants that I'm taking from. So, for example, if I'm picking native buckwheat, native California buckwheat, I spread some of its seeds. I'm doing it a favor, right? So to plants, animals are just seed carriers. That's all we're useful for. And so I'm being what it wants me to be, which is a seed carrier. Or maybe I'll give it a drink of my water, or bury some of my, a little bit of my lunch, right? So that some cultures offer some bites of their food back to the earth for the spirit world. And that's literally providing compost for nature. And so it doesn't have to, this idea of giving back, there's, reasons for the benefits that are explainable. But also, sure, it feels good to give. We love to give. I love to give presents. Who doesn't love to give something? It always feels really good. So of course, every time we do something that feels good, we're getting dopamine, right? Our happy drug. And giving, whether it's a compliment or a word of thanks, is one of the best ways to get that dopamine spike. So it's going to feel good if you say thank you to the plant, or look at how beautiful your shiny leaves are, poison oak, as I'm trying to avoid it, right? It is going to feel good because I'm literally bathing my brain in dopamine. But also it's benefiting too, right? Spreading the seeds and giving drinks of water. And you had mentioned plants and consciousness, and all life is conscious in some form, and maybe even things that aren't living have some form of consciousness. It depends on your definition of it, but it's very clear that plants know where they are in space. They can sense the world around them. They can process information and react to it, just like we animals can. They seem to have some form of memory. They can communicate with each other. And they even behave in ways that kind of appear nurturing to their young. So are they conscious like we are? I don't really know. I'm not a plant. But if they are, then I think they know each time I pick them, I'm nourishing myself in hopes of being able to serve them.
Beautiful. Due to an unfortunate limited amount of time, I'm going to move on to sort of the last few questions that I've got for you. And it's kind of coming back to where we started in regards to modern humans and, quote, rewilding. And curious what your suggestions are for people who are listening who, say, work in an office or have limited amount of say, free time because of how busy they may or may not be, what does it look like for the modern human to incorporate some of these ideas into their lives when they don't really have time to go up for however many months in the woods and etc.?
There's lots of things that we can do. Most of us walk from the house to the car at least, right? So you're outdoors just a little bit. Find one plant on your street or en route to your office building or to your campus class and classroom, or between your driveway and your house. They're everywhere. Plantain is going to be there. Dandelion's going to be there. There's probably some sow thistle's going to be there. A little lamb's quarter. I just found purslane growing next to my driveway. Gandhi's favorite food. It has heaps of omega fatty acids and way cheaper than salmon. Find something, just one. Get curious about one plant and learn to identify it. It doesn't have to take tons of time. There's all kinds of, using back to technology, all kinds of online resources for you. You don't even have to go buy a book. They're just right there online. Find one plant and commune with it. Whether it's, don't eat something that you don't know what it is, but learn what it is. How did we learn the difference between a Fuji apple and a Red Delicious apple? You learned by tasting. Find a plant, learn what it is, taste it, take communion with it. That's a simple one that we can do. But I think we often feel like we don't have time, and we're not necessarily using our time most efficiently. So keep a time journal. Keep how you spend your time for 48 hours and just really get a sense of how much time you spend indoors. And then, time for things has to be made. Start with something simple like 10 minutes. I've been doing this meditation every single day for almost 700 days. I've never missed a day. And the shortest amount of time I can do it is 9 minutes. And normally I do it for about 25. But I don't always have 25 minutes to make. But if I can't make 9 minutes in my life for something, I would say that my life has gone terribly wrong. So find something and find a plant that you resonate with. Maybe it's even a flower. Maybe it's not even edible, but it would be great to learn. An edible weed, is they're sometimes called.
So you had mentioned just then, you had said you've been doing this meditation for 700 days. And maybe I just missed the reference, but is it a specific meditation? And if so, are you comfortable sharing it? It's understandably if you're not, but if so, it'd be cool.
Yeah, totally. I start with some yoga, just a little stretching and waking up my body and getting into that space, because I spend a lot of time in my head, as you might imagine, as a cognitive psychologist. So I get into my body, and then I do a I'm a Kundalini teacher also, and I do a Kundalini practice of Kirtan Kriya, which involves some mudra, and it's about really focusing on, as there's a chant that goes along with it, but essentially the Kirtan Kriya is for bringing to this space the idea of oneness with the infinite, oneness with the passing of the infinite, one with the birthing of the infinite. And then after I do that practice, I have a loving kindness meditation that I do, that I adapted from one that I really liked in Jack Kornfield's book, A Path with Heart. And it's essentially calling into my life things that I feel like I need to be. For example, may I be love, may I be patient and calm, may I be in service. And then giving that same offering to family, friends, those who I haven't met, all of life. And then I end with some gratitude.
That's great. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah.
And I guess we can end here with some gratitude as well. Thank you so much, Erica, for being on the
Thank
show.
you.
And,
Thank you so much.
sharing with the ATTMind community. And I look forward to meeting you in person at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver.
Oh, me too. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so that concludes that episode of ATTMind Radio with Dr. Erica Wohldmann. I was really just getting back into the swing of doing interviews, so I didn't do my due diligence in asking the best way for you to get a hold of her work. But if you do like what Erica's doing, you have a couple options. Of course, you could go to her website, which is ericawohldmann.com, WOHLDMANN, ericawohldmann.com. Or you could check out her TED Talk, which we mentioned multiple times in the episode and will be linked in the show notes on jameswjesso.com. And lastly, you could check her out at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference if you're going to be around Vancouver at the end of October. So that does it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it amongst your social media networks. Sharing is caring. And if you want to take it to a new level of support, you can always hit up my Patreon page and sign up to becoming a patron of ATTMind Radio. But in the meantime, between now and the next episode, which might be a little while due to going back on the road, I wish you a good life and look forward to the next opportunity to share this journey with you. Thanks. Bye.